Ladies and gentlemen, here we are. It's another Friday Night Live, another podcast powered by X2 batteries, and I'm so excited to be here because I have who I have called my favorite guest of all time back on the podcast tonight, and that is Mr. John Hammonds, fisheries biologist for the TWRA. John, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. I'm happy to be back.
Good, good. I'm glad. I'm glad you're here. I think we're going to have a good conversation tonight. We got a lot of ground to cover. I feel like because I have some ideas kicking around in my head for kind of what I want to talk about and some questions I have for you, as well as some questions that I fielded from some of the listeners. And so I think we're going to have a good
Okay.
night. And it's going to be fun. But I'm glad you're here, man. It's always, like I said, it's always awesome to have you here. It's always awesome when you're here because what's funny is like I love how every time in between the episodes that we do together, there's always like 25 questions that come up, and it's like I'm going to ask John. I'm going to ask.
Okay.
I'm going to ask John, and some I'll text you, and others I'm like, no, I'm waiting till the podcast because
Yeah.
it's a podcast. So, without further ado, though, let's get right into it. Let's start like sending it, and let's just get right into it. So, one of the main reasons I had you on and tonight was a new regulation change. It's going into effect on Douglas Lake here in East Tennessee in what, like 4 days, right? We'll have a
Yeah.
yeah. So
Wednesday.
Wednesday. There you go.
Yeah.
Wednesday. Hey, and everybody who lives in Tennessee, remember, buy your fishing license. I made the mistake. I'm gonna, I guess, self-incriminate. I went fishing today without my fishing license for only part of the day until I realized my fishing license because they expire in February. So make sure and buy your fishing license and don't self-incriminate in front of thousands of your close friends and who works for the TWA like I just did. License. But let's talk about this new regulation change. So can you
Yeah.
kind of outline the regulation change and then, kind of tell everybody how okay, let's just outline the regulation change and then we'll get into the effects of the regulation change.
Okay. Well, before I say that, so the license renewal process has changed a little bit, and now it's from the date of purchase to the date of purchase. It no longer is required to March, renew it March 1st every year. So if you buy it in June, if you bought it in June last year, it'll stay good until June this year.
Oh, well, there you
So
go.
yeah, it's changed. I guess this is the first year we saw those changes. But yeah, so the Douglas regulation, it's a it's a new, definitely a new regulation for Tennessee. It's not new to bass management. Of course, your guest, I guess a few weeks ago or maybe last week, Mr. Gilliland, he's privy to most of that stuff. He's all over the country, and I actually was able to talk to him a little bit about it.
Mhm.
And just a shout out to him. I've been lucky to get to rub elbows with him a little bit lately on different things, and each time I'm around him, I learn a lot. And I'm so happy you had him on there. But anyway, sorry, I'm on my own rabbit hole now. So.
No, hey, listen, he was an amazing guest. That was probably one of the most fascinating conversations I've had, and I can't wait to have him on. And I would love to have both you guys on just to get both
Yeah,
perspectives. Like I'm all
yeah,
about learning, like soaking up
yeah,
the knowledge. And I mean,
yeah.
just when he would get on a topic, you probably notice, like I do when you get on a topic, I just sit there with my mouth sort of agape. It's just like listening. So yeah,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah.
Now I'm in the rabbit hole. You go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So, so it's a 16-inch maximum size limit is kind of the best way to describe it. And so we didn't want to just, halt any kind of keeping or harvest or weighing in or even harvesting for a trophy fish. So there's one fit, you're allowed one fish over 16 inches from June the 1st through September 30th.
Mm,
And then that goes along with a 5 fish creel limit. And black bass, the 5 fish krill limit stays in effect year round.
mm.
And that's in combination. So whether it's a smallmouth, a largemouth, or a spotted bass, which most of the folks that fish in Douglas know that there's very, very few smallmouth in there. Most of them are up in the headwaters. And matter of fact, we've never sampled one with electrofishing gear in at least the 18 years I've been here with the agency. So they're very, very rare in Douglas. So, but anyway, that's spotted bass. But so it's a 5 fish krill limit, and that's all black bass. And from June 1st through September 30th, like I said, it's 16-inch maximum where you can have one fish over 16 inches. And then the other fish, if you choose to keep the one over 16, has to be under 16. or you can have all 5 under. And most of the harvest, or at least the pressure, is typically on the from fishing tournaments for black bass. There's very, very little harvest of black bass across the state, across the southeast, across the nation for that matter. So we realize that. But what that'll do is help keep these bigger fish, and we've talked about that on here, from being weighed in and hauled around and weighed in and treated badly, so to speak, intended to or not. They just don't like to be handled. And I know, and that's not a knock. I know people are extremely good with fish care, and we're all conservation at heart. We don't want to just kill a bunch of fish. So, but whether we want to or not, it does happen. And so that'll hopefully help keep some of that mortality shifted towards the smaller fish, or maybe even none at all, because what's going to happen after September 30th is the size limits go away. So it's any size fish. Well, you can harvest or weigh or whatever you want to do with it. And that will also allow for some harvest of those black bass. And that's a thought amongst folks like myself that, for years that, we realize that harvest is not a bad thing, but catch and release has been the thing for black bass. And it's been great for that sport and that industry. But if you do harvest some smaller fish in that population, it typically helps the bigger fish, or it typically helps to have more big fish in that population. So that's the thought. So from October 1st through May the 30th, is it May 31st, 31 days in May? I've already forgotten. But anyway.
Maybe not.
30 days. Yeah. No. May 31st. So you'll have that option to hold tournaments where you can weigh your 5 biggest fish. And that's typically the cooler water months. And we expect more or less mortality, especially the delayed mortality issue that typically drives that. So, and the good thing about that is we can measure that pretty easily with our standardized electrofishing each spring. We get a good sample of fish, and it typically gives you an idea of the sizes that are out there, and there's indices that you can run. It's called PSD, RSD. A lot of folks kind of know about that, and we'll be able to tell if this regulation made a difference in size. And of course, anglers, will also be able to tell because they kind of know what they catch. So in 3 or 4 years, we could possibly see a little bit more, a few more bigger bass in Douglas. That's the hope anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's what we all want to see, because I do have to say, I think it's not anecdotal at this point that Douglas was doing really well. And then it's really been in the past like 7 to 8 years. It seems there's been like a decline in just fish quality, and there's a ton of fish in there. I mean, if you want to go catch a ton of fish anywhere from literally 14 to 16 inches long, there's a ton in there. It's just, you don't see those big 4 to 5 pound smallmouth and largemouth, it seems like, anymore. And that's super interesting that not only like, fishing pressure did it, but and I wonder, so I have a question. And me and my buddy were kind of talking about this, and this is a rabbit hole already. I mean, here we go. We're already going down one. Like, what is it that is actually like detrimental to the fish? Like, we know that the tournament pressure and the fishing pressure and the handling of fish, I mean, it doesn't matter how well we handle them. Anytime I guess the best word to use is molest wildlife. I mean, anytime you touch something that isn't supposed to be touched by a human, you know what I mean? Like, it has a chance of getting sick or getting injured and dying, so there's that. But like, is it just a simple fact that, like, hey, we picked all the 7-pounders out of this particular area, or we picked a mass majority of the 7-pounders out of this particular area, and we moved them across the lake, and then they ended up either dying or something killing them or a disease getting them? And it's just like those 7-pounders have been replaced by a bunch of 12-inch fish that just aren't getting to that size class, or like what? It's kind of hard to wrap my head around, like, what actually happens to these big fish, because it's like, they don't just disappear. Like, someone has to kill them; they have to be taken out. And then it's like, why isn't there just a big dominant fish that comes and takes its place automatically? Why is it that nature replaces it with smaller fish? It seems like.
Yeah, I mean, it's so you got natural mortality and then you got total mortality. And well, okay, let me say it this way. You got angling mortality and you got natural mortality.
Okay.
And then you have total mortality. And the hopes is that angling mortality is a very small percentage of the total mortality.
Okay.
So you would so the thought would be, well, most of these fish are going to die anyway, so let's just go ahead and harvest them or keep them or whatever. And a longer lived species that grows slow and gets big, you can affect that pretty easily. And bass are probably mid range of that scale, like lake sturgeon. I think I may have mentioned this on here before. I'm sure I have, but like lake sturgeon, if you were to go out and catch, you know, like if you had a creel limit of 30 lake sturgeon a day and people were, you had half your angling pressure on lake sturgeon, you could wipe them out in a hurry.
Yeah.
The bass are, they're way down that scale, and crappies even like further closer or, to the below bass where they don't really succumb to as much of that pressure.
Yeah, those things seem like cockroaches. Like it seems like you
Yeah,
catch enough crappie to get rid of them.
yeah, and they go through cycles, but that annual mortality, the total mortality they face is or natural mortality is pretty high. So angling mortality doesn't really affect that total mortality that much, if that makes sense. So, but as far as the size of those, I mean, it's kind of like a false sense of, uh, what's the word? Not like impression. Like you may get that impression, but it takes a while for a big fish to get big. So it's not like those 12-inch fish replace that 7-pounder. It's just it takes a long time to get that 7-pound fish, and a lot of those do die naturally when they get old and the water gets hot, and they just succumb to spawning stress and all that stuff, or any kind of disease. I mean, just like any old person for that matter, you're just not as good at getting over things as you would. So
Yeah.
And that was part of the complaint is what made us look at that. Some of our commissioners, approached us like, hey, we've got some constituents that's, um, talking about this, and it's definitely not something that we didn't notice. It's just, you really start looking at it harder when you get several of those complaints and those things pointed out. So that was the thought that, okay, well, let's see if we can keep this from happening, because we do know that hot water is bad on big bass, and if they get handled, there's also data out there and that shows that it's also a cumulative effect where if this bass gets caught once this summer, it's probably okay. If it gets caught twice and handled well, it may not be okay. If it's three times, well, there's a great chance it's not going to be okay. And then the fourth is like 100%. So, but yeah, so that's kind of the thought there with that regulation change. And then to answer your question, like, it may not be that those bigger fish are getting replaced by smaller. It's just that there's just not any of those almost big ones ready to grow into that age class.
Yeah, that's interesting. It was a kind of a concept me and my buddy were actually talking about a little while ago. I forgot how we got into the topic, but we were talking about like salt fish in particular, and he was kind of talking about, like, I was like, you got to realize how small some of these bodies of water are in comparison to, say, like the salt water. And I was like, he was talking about redfish, and I was, when I went redfishing, I said, there's a chance that most of those redfish that I caught may have never seen a human being before, or have had limited interactions with human beings. And there's so much biodensity in the area in which they live, because they don't have miles by miles. They have hundreds of miles by hundreds of miles to exist in.
Yeah.
And I was like, and unlike a bass, where, like on Douglas Lake in particular, it's a good sized body of water, but I wouldn't call it a big body of water. I mean, you can run from one end to the other. I mean, in an hour. Like you can be from the Nolichucky as far up as you can get without ripping your prop off down to the dam in 40 minutes, easy.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's one of those things. It's like, no matter what we do, it's like you aren't ever going to have enough biodensity for us to, I guess this isn't, I'm not saying this, there's not enough room for enough big fish to grow to be big fish without being touched by somebody eventually.
Yeah. Right.
And so I think it's just an interesting concept that a lot of people don't understand. I think that's why lakes like Chickamauga, and then you go down to Texas like Sam Rayburn and these giant bodies of water, these fish have a better chance of getting big because they have a better chance of not interacting with a human. Whereas like our Loudons, our Douglases, our, even Cherokees, like there is a greater chance just because of sheer fishing pressure that these bodies of water get that they're going to eventually interact with a human. And
Yeah.
it's an interesting thought. Kind of, it's almost like a thought experiment to go down. Like
Yeah.
what size is a body of water big enough that you're going to get less human interaction with a certain amount of fish?
Yeah.
That you're going to see bigger fish. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just a crazy concept to think about.
Yeah.
Um,
I think just going a little bit further than that, I think that, we our mind may trick ourselves a little bit in that, because you have, a reservoir or lake, those bass only occupy that littoral zone, and close to the bank. And so, you're not really, it's not like you're looking at that whole reservoir and saying, well, they've got all this room. I mean, they do have the room, but that's not where they live. And
mhm.
it's similar with those redfish. I mean, it's not, the chances of catching the fish that's never been caught are greater there, but it's still not as big as good as what you'd think. I mean, there's a lot of angling pressure, and those saltwater regulations are in place for the same kind of reasons,
Yeah.
because the angling or harvest, or whatever you call it, angling mortality
Mhm.
is significant enough to where it can outweigh the natural mortality. So you have to put some restrictions on
Yeah, and that's something that my buddy Judd, he's a guide down in
it. Yeah.
North Carolina, and he talked about. He said like North Carolina's regulation of shrimping boats in particular,
Mm-hmm.
and like they have those, I guess they're gill net type
Yeah.
deals that they catch the shrimp with. He said they just
Trawls. Yeah.
they hammer the fingerling redfish, and it's like one of the things that all the anglers are in an uproar about, but it's like nobody listens to them because the whole shrimping industry has like they got the bigger pool because they make more money kind of deal.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's something that in North Carolina, like they're constantly worried about, because he does talk about like how the red fishing it's just not as good as it used to be. But like when
Yeah.
I go down there and there's a pack of 15 redfish swimming down the bank and I throw something from them, they eat, and I'm like, it's the best thing ever. And Judd's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I remember
Yeah.
I remember the good old
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah. Yeah, there's no doubt they see fewer lures, or at least it feels that way when you're fishing for them. And those
absolutely. And
are,
I think if anything with them redfish, it's a temperament thing. They're born pissed off. Like it's like
yeah,
if it gets in front of my face, it's dead.
yeah,
And
I
so
agree.
you're
Yeah,
dealing with that there.
yeah,
Oh, that's funny. Well, that's good. I'm glad we got that out there for anybody that lives in Tennessee. I know not everybody that listens to podcasts here on the live stream, is from Tennessee, but I think it's good to know that anglers are listened to here. I think our state does a really good job of listening to anglers, listening to people, and listening to stakeholders
yeah,
that are out there doing it and see the changes. And so now that that's in place, I can't wait to see 4 or 5 years from now when we have this conversation again, like the change that it makes. I think it's going
yeah.
to be really cool because I mean, this is real time, almost experimentation. This
Mhm,
is the scientific method at work. We've changed,
yeah,
put a different input in, and we're going to
yeah.
see the results.
That's right. Yep.
And so that's awesome. All right, now I want to get into kind of what I titled this live stream. I got to thinking about this over the past couple days, and it was spurred on by the weather we've been having, a bunch of questions my buddy Michael has had, some discussions me and my dad's had, questions that I've got in the comments, and it's just about like bass spawning. And we're getting into that time of year where we're about to start getting into the baby making season for largemouth and smallmouth bass and spotted bass too, but just bass in general. So I kind of want to start at the very beginning, what we consider, pre-spawn, this time before they're actually moving up to get on beds. And us as bass anglers, this is like our favorite time of year because you can go catch a bunch of fish. It seems like they're
Yeah.
all eating and feeding up and getting ready to go make babies and do all those kinds of things. But like, what is the starting process when a largemouth bass actually starts making eggs? Like, is it a something that like they're always there and then they just like start to get hardened up and solidified as the time gets right? Or is it one of those things like the days get longer and they start making eggs, the water temperature like what is that? You know, I guess for like a woman or any other mammal, we have just a period of time of which they make their eggs and get ready to be able to
Right.
have babies.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is that bass's process? When does that start for them?
Well, so you have to think about the mode of reproduction. So it's external fertilization.
Mhm.
So fish and bass in particular, they don't have to worry about, making sure that they're growing the eggs and then worry about getting them fertilized right then and there inside their body to make babies. So that, and this is not something that I'm an expert in, but in general, fish will produce eggs. They can produce eggs nearly almost as soon as they quit laying them. And they grow them throughout the year, and I guess at different stages, depending on nutrition and how well they're doing, and the health of that individual animal is how when they develop. So most of the eggs are developed pretty, as far as being like big and fertile or ready to be fertilized, developed the last few months. But I mean, people catch, for instance, crappie, because a lot of them are clean. They'll catch them in July and August, and they're full of eggs. And and now fish can also reabsorb eggs. I don't know what the rate is in bass versus a crappie or anything else, but that's a part of their physiological process they can do. And then I've also, I've heard, and this is something I don't know for sure, that they will lay them, not necessarily, they will extract them if something's wrong. If they're sick or whatever. But I guess there may be some lab experience, but I don't really want. That's probably more hearsay than it is like stuff, because I've never read that. I've just heard people talk about that.
So you're saying like that if they get stressed in a certain way, that they'll just like dissolve them and use the nutrients to go about it, whatever. But
if they don't,
that's not like hard proof. It's just kind of, you've heard people say that.
Well, the extraction is what I'm saying is not hard proof. The reason why I say it, because like in a hatchery setting, the fish will blow their eggs out with no chance of fertilization if they get stressed.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense? But like in the wild, they can reabsorb those eggs. Again, I don't know what rate, versus species, but I do know that the physiological processes of fish allow them to reabsorb their eggs for the nutritional value.
Gotcha.
And I don't think it's a normal occurrence, but it can happen.
Gotcha.
So having said all that, they will grow those eggs throughout the year, and individual fish will grow them quicker and bigger and whatever, depending upon their circumstance and how much nutrition they're getting. So it's not just that all of a sudden they've got eggs and 2 weeks later they're laying them. It's months. It's several month process.
Yeah, so it's not like a chicken. Like a chicken,
no.
A chicken can I have chickens, and chickens can lay eggs literally every single day.
Yeah,
and they're constantly have new eggs ready to rock when that egg's done.
Yeah,
so, interesting. Yeah. So it's like I guess bass don't have a gestation period because it's fertilization outside the body, but their period of which they develop eggs, I guess in my mind, I felt like was like a 2-week process. Hey, it's time to make eggs, and then they make eggs. So no, this is like, so they can start making eggs as early as, as soon as they get done, and they can develop them and they just hang out until it gets right, and then it's time to start making babies, and they lay them, and they're ready to go.
Yep.
Interesting. Very interesting. So I guess the next step of the process is, we've got this bass. She's big. She's fat, full of eggs. Water temperature, time of day, moon phase. What is it that actually is driving a bass to go make babies? And I know that's probably that's a loaded, deep question. So let's start go. Let's go into
That's a very simple answer. Water temperature is key.
Water temperature. Yeah. Okay.
And now other things play into a factor there, because there's different, I don't know what the word is. There's different ways that fish say, okay, I'm going to give the selfish gene. I want to make my gene go into the next generation. So I'm kind of hedging my bet, and I'm doing different things. So do I lay my eggs in hopes that the planktonic bloom happens, at this temperature, so if I know instinctively that at 57 degrees, my eggs take 6 days to hatch. Well, at 59 degrees, they take 4 days to hatch. And when can I get that peak, planktonic bloom to feed my fry? And that's all figured out through nature. And so you have different fish, some spawn early, some spawn late. And it's because of that reason there's always a few that survive whenever those water temperatures get perfect. The algae bloom and the planktonic bloom gets perfect. The nutrient level gets right. Like it's all kind of a big, stars aligned kind of equation.
Mhm.
And yeah, the moon phase, apparently maybe play a part of that. There's not a lot of research that shows anything about that. It's more so that fish key in on that. Now, the bait behavior in the moon and all that, what fish may see, like I don't know, there's something about the moon that causes animals to behave differently, apparently, because success rates and all that can be measured. But that's not something we typically get into with managing fish. So we're more worried about the reproductive cycle and the water temperature, because that's what's fish really key in on. And those spawning runs, people say, well, I was here last April the same day, and the river was full of fish, and now there ain't none. What's going on? It's like, well, the river's 12 degrees different, so that's why they're not here.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's interesting, because that's one thing a lot of people talk about, and even myself, like talking about what are all the different factors that play into spawning, and we always go back to water temperature. I think
Yeah.
I've always thought water temperature was king, and then length of day, but I guess length of day is relative to water temperature as well, because the longer
Right.
the days get, the
Right.
more sunlight they get, the
Mhm.
warmer they get. Duh. I mean, that's like
Yeah.
a simple math equation. But the one thing
Yeah.
you said that was really interesting is I never took into consideration was like that you know phytoplankton bloom, like, because
Mhm.
that is what a baby bass is consuming
Mhm.
right out of the egg, because they're
Yep.
little bitty. And I think a lot of
Yep.
people, if you've never seen bass fry, they are tiny, tiny, tiny. I mean, they look
Mhm.
like little black specks swimming
Mhm.
around in the water, and they grow pretty quickly. I mean, it is pretty amazing to see, like, know where a bed's at, watch a bass spawn, and these little black specks are there. And then, like, the next week, they're about as long as the end of your pinky. And it's just amazing to watch them grow. But
Mhm.
that whole first, I mean, how long in a bass's life? At what point do they start, I guess, go to solid food? When do they start
Yeah.
chasing things like bugs and minnows and things? Like, how long
Yeah.
to get to that part of their life?
It's a length of the fish, just simple, physics of eating that.
Mhm.
So, and I don't know, I cannot remember the length, but it's pretty quick. And I don't, it's, 3 inches maybe. They're small. They're still really small, I guess is the best way to answer that. I can't tell you specifically because I can't remember, but like you have to also remember that, like, so bass will spawn when the water's about 60, And the other thing about the photo period, the length of day. So if it's still, that does have a secondary effect, but if the water temperature is cool enough, they will not lay their eggs because they just simply won't hatch.
Mm,
It may take them longer at lower temperatures, but at a certain critical temperature, they just simply won't hatch.
you just don't
So
even.
they won't lay them.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. That's interesting.
But I was going to say you have to. So a bass will hatch at 60 to 65 degrees, and then sunfish a little bit warmer, and then shad a little bit warmer than that. So they can start eating those tiny fry of the sunfish and shad very quickly, even at like an inch or 2 inches big. So whenever they're able to revert to or convert to being a piscivorous animal, in other words, they eat other fish,
Mhm.
they eat their prey, then that's when they really start growing. And I don't know what size that typically is, but those little fry that they eat, a tiny bass can eat an even tinier fry. So as soon as they start eating them, that's when they grow, and that can be a pretty small size.
That's incredible. That's incredible. That's one of those things that makes me like really think. I look at that and I go, God has to be real, because how
Yeah,
in the world does it line up that
yeah,
these bass are born and then these sunfish are born and
yeah,
these shad are
yeah,
born. And then what's even more amazing is if you look at that process, those bass who just expended all that energy making those babies have all that food to eat too,
yeah,
because you have, bluegill spawn and shad spawn and
yeah,
on and on and on. That's really, really
yeah.
cool. What was that word that you just used? Because I want to learn a new word. You said persiva?
Oh, piscivorous.
Does that mean they
Like
eat other?
yeah, Pisces is like the
Yeah,
kind of Latin term for fish. So piscivorous means they eat other fish.
I'm
So
I'm whipping that out on somebody in conversation at some point next week. I just want to know. I'm gonna be like, "Did you know that bass are piscivorous?" And let me tell you what piscivorous is. So, one question that I have is this week we've had these 80-degree temperatures, and
yeah.
not only have we had 80-degree temperatures, but we've had a ton of rain, and so we've had an influx of warm rain. Um, Creeks are pushing in a ton of water right now.
Mhm.
I went to the back of a creek the other day. I saw 63 degrees.
Wow.
This 63-degree water temperature, I'm guessing, come on fairly quickly just because of 2
Mhm.
80-degree days back to back, ton of
Mhm.
sunlight, muddier water.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's going to warm up quicker. How fast are those bass going, hey, it's time to boogie? Is it like one of those things that, like, if it is a day's worth of 60-degree temperatures, they're trying to go towards the
Mhm.
bank and they're trying to spawn? Or
Yeah.
is it like a 2 or 3 week period where it's got to sustain
Yeah.
temperature for them to want to do that?
Yeah. I mean, it's probably the latter because, you know, just by doing our electrofishing sampling and just being out there seeing it happen,
Yeah.
you don't see them really attack that bank and shoreline and stay there, until it's sustained temperatures.
Mhm.
And they'll also pull off the bank too a little bit when it cools back down. So they may get ready, but I mean, their species has experienced this for many warm springs before and after, and they're still here. So they've got a way to know, kind of figure that out. But it's got to be like you described, where it's kind of stays that warm for a while.
Yeah, it's like a sustained kinda deal.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen that myself, like, in creeks and rivers, like,
Hmm.
because that's one thing that I love to do in the summers when it gets really, really hot. I go in the creeks and the rivers, and in some of these creeks, they just start peaking into the 60s, like,
Hmm.
in July.
Yeah.
And it's been amazing to me to see, like, you go up in those creeks and you'll have, like, 2, 3 days where it's pretty warm, but then you'll have, like, when you really get into, like, July, August, you'll sustain in that 60-degree range,
Hmm.
and those
Hmm.
bass move up and they spawn. I mean, I
Yep.
saw 2 spotted bass on the bed in August last year,
Yeah. Wow.
only 60 degrees, and so it
Yeah.
just hit that temperature at the right time for a sustained period of time. They move up and they
Yep.
start making babies, and they
Yep.
weren't the kind of spotted bass that you wanna see making babies, but they were making babies. I
Yeah.
almost M80'd them for you, but I thought, "You know what, I'm just let them
Yeah.
come back for them later." That's
Yeah.
but, okay, yeah, that's what I was kinda thought, is one of those things when I got in that water temperature, I was like first thing that hit my mind, I was like, "This is warm enough for them to be making babies." I was like, and I
Yeah.
just wonder, and then I got a bite, and it was kinda like a bite, like a male on a bed, and I was like,
Mm.
"There's no way." But then I thought,
Hmm.
maybe there is a way. Maybe it
Yeah.
just something hit that in particular fish to go do that. And I think that leads me into my next question is, like, I've experienced spawning bass in a ton of different ways. I've experienced them in Florida where it feels like it's just like random. Like it's just, they're here, they're there, they're on this part of the lake spawning, but not really on this part of the lake.
Mm.
I've experienced it here in Tennessee where it's like it feels like it's waves. Like you have a wave and then another wave and then another wave. And then I've experienced it in Michigan where it seems like as soon as the water temperature gets right, every
Yeah.
bass in the lake decides we're
Yeah.
making a bed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when a bass like physiologically gets to that water temperature, things seem to be sustained. They seem to be right. It seems like, hey, instinctually, this is the right time. What is like, is it just a go? Like, how fast does that process happen? Like, is it, they just gets switched and they start dusting out beds and then the females move up and they start laying eggs? Like, why does it seem like in all these different scenarios it happens so different? Like sometimes it's waves, sometimes it's a mass, sometimes it's
Yeah.
random. Like what is that instinctually that's driving them to be like that?
Mm. Yeah. I really don't know for sure, but just kind of going back to my thought earlier when, they got different kind of methods they try. And so if, if this, if this bass nest is successful in the earlier time period over that one, then that's going to favor those genes. And then if the one is favored for the little bit of later time period, that's going to favor those genes. And I would think maybe in the south there's more windows, like of those warmer temperatures and cooling off and warmer. And then up north, maybe it's just like a smaller window. Maybe that's why they all spawn at once. But I don't know. That's just kind of thinking through that. I really don't know though.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it does seem like up north in particular, it's like everything. It's not just
Yeah.
grass. I mean,
Mhm.
nature, everything. It's like
Mhm.
when that ice finally melts and
Yeah.
they have like a week of 70, 80-degree temperatures, it is on like Donkey Kong with everything in nature. And I think
Yeah.
it's just the fact that they know that, hey, come August,
Right.
literally going to start cooling down again. Like
Yeah.
by September, they could have
Yeah.
snow. By November,
Yeah.
they're definitely starting to form
Yeah.
ice.
Yeah.
And so that may just be, like you said, these bass almost experiment in their own way. It's like,
Mhm.
they do it at different times. They kind of, hedge their bet, like you said. And
Yeah.
it may just be that kind of almost natural selection process of the bass who
Mhm.
have hedged their bets at the right times.
Mhm.
Obviously, passed on bass have
Mhm.
that same kind of, genetic makeup.
Yeah.
It's going to seem to hedge their bet at the same time. I
Yeah.
mean, and here's a rabbit hole. The genetics of bass, like, okay, so we can pass things down as humans, our heredity, like, um, I may have a mannerism that my dad has, and some are learned, but some of them literally, it's like you pick
Yeah.
that up through heredity.
Yeah.
Do bass seem to have that, or are they just too lizard brain and kind of too instinctual to have that? Or do people who study bass genetics see things being passed down like that?
Yeah. I
Behaviors.
mean, yeah, I'm sure there's that Mendelian genetics and would come to play there where big A, little a, and that's no different in any animal. I mean, that's or any plant. I mean, that's across the whole DNA spectrum. So, yeah, whatever behavior or whatever trait is dominant in that fish can easily be passed along.
Listen, don't get my wife going on Pundit Square. She loves those fish. Like, there's no joke. I forgot what we were doing one time, but she was like doing our Pundit Squares. She's like, our kids will have blue eyes, and I'm like, okay, whatever you
yeah,
say.
yeah,
Like, nerd.
yeah,
Oh yeah, that's high school. That's high school biology right there.
yeah,
My friend.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
CA. Everybody who's
yeah,
in high school biology, if you're a high schooler or even in college, it pays off to know your Pundit
yeah,
squares. All right,
yeah.
because it can help you
That's
with
right.
math.
That's right.
That's
That's
funny.
right.
All right, so now I want to get into some. I think these are more like debated topics. These are things that like I hear people arguing about all the time, but it still plays into the whole pre-spawn fishing deal. The number one question I actually had Austin from Dream Catchers fishing on week before last, and he brought up the topic of why does a fish's mouth turn red during the pre-spawn? And there's two questions I have coming out of this, but the first one is why are their mouths red? Like, what is it that gives them that lipstick that makes their crushers bloody red? Like, what is that that's doing that to them?
Uh, but you got me. I don't know. Whatever they've been chewing on, eating. I do know that like if you're looking at barotrauma, where you catch a fish deep
Mm.
and you pull it up, and those capillaries do bust very easily near the surface of their skin, and that's what turns those fins red and stuff. And so I mean, I would be willing to bet it's just that behavior of fighting off other fish and whatnot, and you know, just making the nest and everything like that, because those capillaries are close to the skin and they do break pretty easily and cause that redness.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was. Theory was two things. I thought, well, number one, it has to be whatever they're munching on because they don't have hands.
Mhm.
So it's not like
Yeah.
us, we can tear apart something hard and eat it like a
Mhm.
peanut. Like if we had to just crunch on a peanut, it's going to tear our
Mhm.
mouth all up, but we can take that thing apart and eat it. Or it's like my favorite example is like Captain Crunch. If you ever eat Captain Crunch, it just tears your mouth all to crap. And so I said, a crawdad has to be
Yeah.
kind of like Captain Crunch,
Mhm.
and they're fighting all the way down. It's not like
Mhm.
they're giving up until they're dead. And so I thought, not only that, but then I thought too, if you look at a smallmouth or a largemouth, I've literally taken a smallmouth out of the water and watched it change colors.
Yeah.
And so I
Mhm.
thought, it could just be in the process of hooking it, and then
Mhm.
that, those stress hormones come
Yeah.
out, fight or flight
Mhm.
comes out, that fish's mouth may have not been that red. But like you
Yeah.
said, when that stress of the fight, those stress hormones come out, those capillaries bust, and that blood or just blood rushes to that area.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when we see them, their mouth is red, when
Mhm.
actually their mouth wasn't red until
Right.
we jabbed them in the face
Yeah.
with a hook.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I thought that was kind of a top. I love it because I've had many debates with many people about why fish get lipstick this time
Yeah.
of year. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
I don't
Okay,
know.
one question, the rabbit hole segment off of that one. this is just a total rabbit hole because it doesn't even lead into the other part of fish's mouths being red. And a question I'm having about why do some bass have black spots? What is that?
Yeah, there's actually a study going on right now with, I think it's USGS, and man, I can't remember all the details. So, but just to kind of simplify some of that, so fish have pigment, and then those, what is it, chromatophore cells is controls that pigment, can make it darker and lighter, and that's why you just mentioned a minute ago, you can see fish change color because of that reason. Think of an octopus, but way, way, way less complicated. Fish can darken and lighten. And those spots, though, they stay dark, and it's just a collection of that dark pigment in some of those cells. But it's also could be a precursor to um, like melanoma or something similar. And there is a term for it, and it's skipped my mind here tonight, but there is actually a term for that, and they just call it blotchy bass syndrome. But if you Google that, it'll probably give you the viral name, the virus name, and all that. And there's some weird kind of results. It's like it's like some fish, it's a precursor to cancer, and some of them it's not. And I would imagine maybe like a freckle on us, where some of them are okay, and in certain moles, freckle that turned into a mole, so to speak. Now, I'm not a dermatologist, but it's maybe similar to that, kind of like, okay, you better go get that checked out, and it could be similar to that blotchy bass syndrome. But
so the word you're looking for is hypopigmentation and or melanosis.
Okay, melanosis. That's it. Melanosis.
So a bass can get skin cancer?
Well, apparently, that's not. I mean, you're talking like fish physiology and necropsy and stuff that almost like veterinarians would study. And I don't really have that background, but yeah, it's just like any of us. It's just it's probably more rare in fish, I would imagine, than it would be us. But yeah,
that's super interesting, especially considering, man, I just like opened up a can of worms in my own head, because then you think about like refraction and how much light's getting in and what sort of light's getting into them through the water, because the water totally changes the light spectrum when it hits. That is interesting, man. We're gonna have to find somebody to talk to that about, because like that is like okay, is cancer other kinds of okay? So animals can get cancer. People obviously get cancer. Is there like cancers that bass get that we know about that that I don't know? Do they get like bass liver cancer? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. That's
I really don't know. That is very possible. And that melanosis may not be the same kind of thing as melanoma with us, and it may not, and cancer may be the wrong term, but it's something similar to that. And I don't want to mislead people, because I really don't know, what I'm talking about on that. I just know it's kind of similar to that.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Well, it's interesting for me because I've been reading a lot about or dad has cancer, and so I read stuff about cancer whenever I see it. It's always interesting to me. It's a very interesting. It's a devastating but interesting disease because of how little we know about it, but how much we also know about it. You know what I mean? And one thing that I read, and this is kind of keeping in the nature side of things, was talking about deer antlers. They said a deer's antler is the only thing in nature other than cancer that cell proliferation happens as fast as it does in cancer.
Wow.
And they said they're studying deer antlers right now because it may be a key to understanding how cancer can grow as fast as it does, because there's nothing else in nature that grows like cancer does other than deer antlers. And so that just made, again, when you said that, it kind of opened up a can of worms in my head. What in the world even is that? You know what I mean? Like, is there something there? Because, not to go down another rabbit hole, because I do want to get back to the topic, I think the cure to cancer is going to be something crazy like that. I think it's going to be like the key is going to be found in nature, something like deer antlers. If we can figure out deer antlers, maybe we can figure out a type of cancer. You know what I mean? I don't know. But anyway, all right. Go back on we talked about red lips. I want to talk about now, obviously, we talk about red lips. We also talk about a bass's diet. They're eating something, and why are they eating certain things? I have heard things like bass eat a lot of crawdads because it helps to harden their eggs. I've heard bass focusing on shad because they got a lot of amino acids and the fats that help them to produce eggs.
Mhm.
I've heard, bass eats birds because birds fall in the water. I don't know. What is it in spawning bass? Like, what is that particular food item, or is there a particular food item that they focus on that seems to help them create babies, or is that something that science has even kind of dove into yet?
Yeah, so a male. So most of the mortality, natural mortality in bass comes. Well, I shouldn't say that. A lot. I don't know if it's most. It's a lot of mortality comes from spawning bass because it's very stressful to them.
Mhm.
And they're more concentrated on guarding that nest for a male, guarding the fry, and the female is concentrated on where is the best nest that I can, in my mind, have the best chance for my babies to make it to the next generation.
Mhm.
So I don't think they worry much about feeding during that time. But now you catch them because that's what they're doing is biting that bait. But
So
you
I'm talking pre-spawn, like so we're now.
okay,
So like there's a lot of dudes. I mean, I've caught them doing a little bit of everything. Like I went today, found them holed up on one spot, caught like 10
yeah,
on an
yeah,
orange crankbait.
yeah,
It's supposed to look like a crawdad, it's supposed to mimic crawdad, it's supposed to mimic a
yeah.
bait, whatever it is. Like in that kind of era where they're or that stage of their spawning kind of deal. I think bass. Okay, let me back up a little bit. I think bass fishermen put way too much stock in calling the pre-spawn because I think so many people get it in their head that bass are acting in a way to prepare for bedding when maybe they're just acting in a way because it's the optimal time to eat something.
Mhm.
And that bedding action is a secondary kind of thing that happens because water
Yeah,
temperatures get right. And
yeah.
so, I think the question I'm asking is now that I'm thinking about it, I'm kind of like, oh, I guess the question I'm asking is in this time period, let's say the pre-spawn that we like to coin it,
Yeah,
there a particular prey item that they're
yeah,
going, hey, I need that because it is going to result in X
yeah.
better thing about my eggs.
Right, right. Yeah, so there's a couple of things going on there. So one is you mentioned the water temperatures rising, and that just naturally makes cold-blooded animals want to eat more. They're just more active. Their metabolism rises, and there's got to be a component. The second thing, there's got to be a component that says, okay, I need to go into this spawning mode, this spawning activity that as healthy as the most healthy that I can. That just makes sense. That's pretty um, like that's got to be a thing. So anyway, so what? How can I get the most calories and go into this spawning activity the most healthy? What can I eat the most? And so there's a conversion there, right? You got to figure out how much energy you're spending to catch this prey and how many calories that prey's giving you.
Mhm.
So bass are opportunistic. So if I absolutely knew the answer to that question, I probably would be practicing for a tournament coming up this weekend. And so, but shad is usually a big prey item, and of course, anything they can catch. There's actually some pretty interesting food. It's simple to do those food. That's not simple, but to get a food out of a bass's stomach is simple, and
Mhm.
so you can categorize that into what they've
Nice.
eaten. And
It's really
what's
simple.
that?
Knife.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, well, you can do it by flushing water into their stomach and letting it fall out, and then you can turn the fish loose. That's how folks like me do. You don't have to kill the fish.
I didn't even know that that was a thing.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah, yeah. It's called gastric lavage. You can Google that one too. So
I want you to teach me how to do that because that's
yeah.
cool. I need to know what gastric lavage is, and I want to gastric lavage a fish here.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry, I
Uh,
interrupted you. Go ahead.
no. That's good. So I was just at a meeting a few weeks ago, and there was some studies done on the smallmouth out in Missouri and looking at the stream fish, reservoir fish, hybrids between what is it, the Neosho smallmouth and the regular quote regular smallmouth. And anyway, but they looked at those food uh, diet items, and I don't remember what time of year it was, but it was pretty distinct between like reservoir and river and even the the different species like the Osho and then the smallmouth and then their hybrids. So there's some of that in play too, like, well, where are they at and what's available to them? And it goes back to that kind of equation. Like, I'm not going to go, swim, 400, 500-yard circle in search of my quote favorite item. I'm just going to eat what's right here beside of me. So,
Yeah, yeah, and that's interesting to me too because I think a lot of people don't really take that into consideration when they're fishing for fish.
mhm.
One thing today that I noticed where I started, I wasn't seeing a ton of bait fish. I mean, I got the best electronics in the world. I'm able to, pan a 360 pan around me.
Yeah,
So that's a lot of bait fish right there.
yeah,
I wasn't seeing that. But then when I moved to this other creek that we moved to, there's a ton of bait fish in there. So the opportunity for fish to eat was there. And then too,
hmm
I don't know how many crawdads are crawling on the bottom. I really
hmm
in my mind, I want to think that they're just like everywhere down there.
yeah,
I don't know, but like it's
yeah,
like one of those things that I think a lot of people need to understand. It's like bass are going to be where the food's at, and they're going to take the best opportunity they can to be as lazy as they possibly
yeah,
can while
yeah,
consuming as many calories as they
yeah,
possibly can.
yeah,
And like, that's one thing about like Great Lakes smallmouth that I don't think a lot of people can conceptualize is just how much freaking food is in the Great Lakes and
mm,
even these inland lakes. I mean, this is not a joke. I don't know if I've ever told you this story. Me and Ben went to this inland lake one time and we put the boat in the water. I'm like, oh, look, a crawdad. I'm like, oh, look, another crawdad. And then I kind of like my eyes kind of unfocused on the particular, the one crawdad. And then I realized literally the bottom was
mm,
moving with crawdad.
mm.
And this
Wow.
this lake is, I mean, full of
Mm,
these just freakish smallmouth. They don't even make any sense. They're
mm.
17 inches long, but they're like 20 inches in girth, and they weigh 4
Wow.
pounds. I mean, they're freaks of nature. I have to send you some
Yeah,
pictures of some. I mean,
yeah,
they just don't make sense. And it's like when you think about it, these fish literally are like cows, and the
yeah,
fact that they can just swim around all day and just consume calories. Like, a cow
yeah,
grazes all day long,
yeah,
smallmouth literally just swim around and just
yeah,
pluck crawdads off the bottom. And so interesting concept. That's a lot of people kind of get into this whole deal like bass are eating red crankbaits because
mhm,
it looks like a crawdad in the pre-spawn,
mhm,
and crawdads is what they want to eat because it's the best food for their eggs. And like those are the
mhm.
conversations that we have. But I guess
Yeah,
really look at it is what is in that bass's vicinity and what's
yeah,
going to make him spend the least
yeah,
amount of calories to get the most out of
yeah,
that expenditure.
yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and that's a good way to generalize it. And as you were describing that, I remembered a lot of these bait companies do good research
Mhm.
because they want to sell their product as well. But I think, and I don't, well, I won't mention brand names. I don't want to mess anything up. But anyway,
Oh,
they,
mention hey, mention
well,
you're not gonna hurt.
okay,
Send
well, I
we'll blame it
do
on
what?
I said send it. We'll blame it on me.
Okay. Well, I was in a Zoom meeting with some folks, and it was people that had worked for Berkeley, and they were talking about the process they do to test different colors and shapes. And it was really interesting. And they went, studied the fish physiology and then the reaction. And it was a very good scientific experiment. And, color was, if I remember right, color was not critical, but it seemed like shape had something to do with it. And then also like the newness, like this is something different.
Yep.
And that can work in the opposite effect too. If they're eating shad, and you rip a crawdad by them, they're just like, that I want this shad. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, a new lure can have that effect. But so this talking about color, red. Um, if you look at what colors are filtered out through the water spectrum, red is filtered out first. So it doesn't take very deep into the water column to where red looks brown or
Mhm.
muddy or natural camouflage. And that's why you see red in a lot of the fish's color,
Mhm.
you know, like darters and that sort of thing, because it works as camouflage, just a couple feet deep. So red is one of those colors that's more natural to fish. So it tends to attract those bites maybe a little bit more, but it wasn't like like a huge amount. It
Yeah,
wasn't like 80% better. But anyway, sorry, I got on my own rabbit trail there. But yeah,
you're good. No, you're good. No,
yeah,
because it's super interesting. I mean, that's one thing that has always been interesting to me because red is one of my favorite colors. I mean, like
mm,
this time of year, those reds and those oranges,
yeah,
methylate, like I mean, bright
mm,
oranges, bright orange gets. I mean, if anybody follows me on Instagram or watches any of my YouTube videos, you'll know a blaze money badger has been just kicking their teeth in for me lately, and it's just I don't know, if it's one of those things. It's contrast to them, if it's shape, if it's sound, and like you said, newness. I think newness in every aspect, shape, sound, color, smell. I think that can get a bass to eat a lot of the times just because it is something so contrasting to the environment around him. It's almost like it's like an albino deer.
Yeah.
For a
Yeah.
predator, it sees all these brown deer that's kind of hard to pick out, especially I mean, I don't know how, let's say a mountain lion, right? You don't know how I don't know how mountain lions' eyes work, but you would have to say a deer is the color that it is to do a really good job of not being seen by a mountain lion.
Yeah.
You've got this all white deer, that mountain
Yeah.
lion's like, well, that one's screwed up.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes with lure choices, the more gaudy, the better. It's like what I've found in fishing. Supernatural, the most gaudy thing that you've got in the box. One of those two things are going to get them to, and it's like there's no in between those two things.
Yeah.
And it's so I think sometimes, especially this time of year, it's just the gaudiness of putting things in front of them because metabolism's lower because it's a little bit colder. Their water's usually a little bit dirtier, so they're going to have a hard time seeing it. So if you show them something super gaudy, it's just like, not only does it have that effect of, well, that thing is really standing out and not doing a good job of hiding itself, but it's also just that reactionary style bite that we get. And so that is super interesting. But yeah, Berkeley, to go back to Berkeley, that is one reason that I am very, very thankful to work with Berkeley, because it was
Okay, good.
when I started working with them, it was like, I really believe that this science, everybody science. And I'm know. And then when you really start talking to Dan and you start talking to the dudes who are over there designing baits, Kyle, Dan, and then the actual scientists doing like the scientific work on studying the bass physiology, you start to realize like these aren't just things that they're doing to do them, to just make something. It's like this actually has like real deal science behind it.
Yeah.
Eat better. And
Yeah.
the max scent thing in particular is probably one of the most fascinating things I've ever experienced in my fishing. And we're going down a rabbit hole, and I love it because I've got a whole nother question for you, but we're gonna go down this rabbit hole anyway. The max scent thing is probably one of the most fascinating things I've ever experienced in fishing, because I know I've got bites when other people don't get bites because I'm fishing max scent. I've fished behind people not fishing max scent and get bites when they don't.
Yeah.
It's like it's the only factor in all the factors that I can consider that makes sense as to why they're eating mine and not eating theirs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it is one of the most fascinating things. And I would love to see more science on that particular kind of idea. You know what I mean? Because I think a bass's nose is probably a lot more prominent than a lot of anglers believe it is.
Yeah.
And I get that assumption because if you look at every other fish in nature, sharks, salmon, the list goes on, they use their nose a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why wouldn't an apex predator like a bass use his nose?
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Very, very interesting. A very interesting thought process. So I just had a question come through thanks to Dad. This old Dad, he's texting me. He loves to text me while I'm doing live streams. I try to read them, and then but let's stay on the color thing for just a second longer, and then I want to ask you about bass color and kind of ask about why they turn certain colors. Dad was asking about chartreuse. I have heard that chartreuse looks like white, period, to a fish.
Yeah.
Bass in particular. How does chartreuse filter out in the water column?
Yeah.
Has there been any studies to kind of show any difference or whatever?
Yeah, there may have been, especially that Berkeley that, like you were saying, I was impressed with what they were doing as well. It was pretty cool. So that color spectrum goes from red is the quickest and blue is the slowest. So that's like deep, ocean, everything looks blue. But I don't know where and I apologize to your dad. I do not know where chartreuse falls out in that scale, but red is the first and blue is the last. And I would imagine chartreuse is up more towards the top.
Yeah.
But I will try to find that out and get him an answer for sure.
Yeah, please do. I find that interesting. I mean, chartreuse, that's another one of those Smallmouth
Yeah.
hate it, and
Yeah.
especially
Okay.
north, like going back to up north, because I've experienced some of the craziest things fishing in my life up north. But like you'll be on like this super clear body of water, and dudes will be throwing a completely off chartreuse spinnerbait, and these smallmouth just like
Mm,
hate it, like
mm,
they want to kill it with everything they have in them.
yeah.
So that's a very interesting one to kind of consider. Is like, what does that fish see? And it seems like
Yeah.
smallmouth in particular, chartreuse and pink are the two colors that they like. I don't know. Something about the
Yeah.
colors, they hate them really, really bad.
Yeah. Mm,
Largemouth, I've never really found like a color that like a largemouth is like just hyperly aggressive for.
yeah.
Smallmouth, but I think smallmouth too. Are they just physiologically more aggressive? Like a spotted bass and a smallmouth, are they just
Yeah.
like a bull shark has higher testosterone? Does a smallmouth
Okay.
have a higher testosterone level? Do we know
I,
that?
I probably, but I don't. Yeah, that's something I'm sure that somebody's looked at.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be Googling. We're both gonna be you're gonna be out reading probably like studies that mean something. I'm gonna be over here just Googling away and not get done.
Yeah.
All right. So when we look at bass, one thing I noticed today, caught a bunch of smallmouth. All the smallmouth I caught super duper pale,
Mm,
very, very I wouldn't say white, but they what oh man, that fish is white. And it's just because they're super pale. Largemouth will
yeah.
do the same thing. What is it that is driving the pigmentation change of a bass? Is it
Yeah.
sunlight exposure? Is it them literally kind of seeing the world around them and adjusting to the world around them? Like, do
Yeah.
bass do that? Like, what's the main driving factor that changes the color of a fish, especially this time of year? It seems they change
Yeah.
color as the water gets warmer.
Yeah. Like from a camouflage kind of standpoint, if they're in, lighter colored water, they'll be lighter. If they're, living under a rock, they'll be darker. That's, pretty common thing. But as far as the water temperature and all that, I mean, I don't know for sure. No, like mood can play a factor. I think I said this earlier a minute ago, but like the pigment in their cells can be controlled by those chromatophores, and that happens, maybe voluntarily sometimes and sometimes involuntarily.
Mhm.
If they get shocked or something, not shocked electricity, like something happens traumatic to them, I'm sure those chromatophores can respond without the fish, but also that, like hiding in the shadows and all that. But I don't know as far as the water temperature, it may play a factor in that because like they're not able to. I don't know. It probably does, but I really don't know.
Yeah, yeah. It's just an interesting kind of idea to think about because they do seem to change color the
Yeah,
warmer it gets, but I think a lot of that has to do with behavior too. You know what I
yeah,
mean? So it's like a largemouth in particular, they're going to start spending more time in shallow water the warmer it
mhm,
gets. So the more
yeah,
sunlight exposure they get, the
yeah,
darker they're
yeah,
going to get just because of that sunlight exposure. You know what I mean?
yeah. And I've noticed those color variations between water bodies as well. Like Douglas, for instance, a lot of those largemouth look faded out. And if you go to like a pond that stays muddy all the time, it's like you can't see any color at all on those
Mhm.
fish. So
They're almost
they're
yeah.
yeah, yeah, this real bleached out looking. So that that probably has to do with that kind of camo kind of thing. Like they just try to blend into their surroundings.
Yeah. So is a bass taking an input through their eye and trying to
Yeah.
blend, like a cut we said octopus, cuttlefish. I mean, obviously those are very different animals. Those are
Mhm,
cephalopods and a lot
mhm,
more advanced as far as the way their brain works, but they can look at their surroundings, take in patterns,
mhm,
they turn into that pattern. Is a bass
mhm,
do that kind of over time? Can it see I would say it sits next to a log for a long time. Will it kind of
mhm.
try to blend into the log? Can they do that?
That's what it seems to be because you'll get one that's really dark and put it in the live well and it turns fades out in just a matter of a few minutes. And
Mhm.
I mean that seems to be what's going on there. Yeah.
You know, this is this is a random thought. This is totally off the wall. I don't know if you ever read Jurassic Park, like the actual book by Michael Crichton.
Mhm, mhm.
Okay, well, in the Lost World of Jurassic Park, one of the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park could change colors like a cuttlefish, and
Okay.
it would blend into its surroundings almost immediately when it got in the trees. Okay, it's one of the most terrifying thoughts if you think about it, because you imagine something that big just
Yeah.
blend into the tree
Yeah.
automatically. And just to think about a fish, you know, like
Yeah.
how crazy. I mean, that's just a crazy thought that I don't think a lot of, like, my whole entire life with a bass, I think a bass is a bass is a bass. He stays that way. When
Mhm.
really, no, it can blend in. Like, that is
Mhm.
just an amazing thought
Yeah.
process that a bass, like we can't do that. Like, we have to
Yeah.
manipulate ourselves. We have to put paint on our face, put camouflage on
Mhm.
our body. That bass literally can, as simple as a creature as it is, can literally change its whole,
Yeah.
like, physical look,
Yeah.
blend in better, to be a more
Yeah.
apex predator. And that's
Yeah.
just all right.
That, that,
So
so fish and reptiles and cephalopods, they have those chromatophores in their skin, and that's what gives them that capability to change that. Yeah, it's the ability to hide or maximize that pigment, the color pigment.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I've watched a lot of documentaries about, like, the cuttlefish and the octopus. Like,
Yeah.
when the octopus is, like, just going across the bottom and it turns into the bottom,
Yeah.
or turns
Yeah.
into a lionfish.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know. And then I go down another rabbit hole of, if aliens are real, are aliens actually octopuses, and are they going to come here and just, transform into trees? Predator, you hear it clicking, and then your buddy's head
Yeah.
blown up.
Yeah.
It's not good.
Yeah.
Oh Lord, we've gone down all the rabbit holes now, John. All right. Now I want to get into something completely off bass. I want to move into muskies, because I'm all curious about the muskies now. And I'm very interested. I don't know if I'm going to turn into them. Don't worry, I'm not going to be out there hucking 8-inch anytime soon.
Yeah.
But I am starting to explore and get into some places where I'm finding some muskies. And these muskies interest me very much, because they are obviously a completely different ball game of an animal
Yeah.
than a
Yeah.
bass I could ever think a bass was.
Mhm.
They act different. They're way more aggressive. They do things completely different. They seem to almost have this sense of reckless abandon about them, where they're
Mhm.
literally not scared of anything at all.
Mhm. Yep.
So, like, what is in our area too? It seems like these muskies are, I don't even know how to describe. It's like I feel like they're in places they shouldn't be. I feel like they do things that we don't think they should do. Like, what is it about a muskie that makes them as kind of sneaky and weird as they are? Like, what is
Yeah.
that thing that drives them to go 13 miles up a creek where they probably
Yeah.
shouldn't be? What is that?
Yeah. Yeah. They're just very aggressive. Just you already said it. They're aggressive and unique, and they are not scared of anything. That's why that they have trouble reproducing. Well, I shouldn't say that. That's why they have trouble surviving to catchable size, because their whole strategy is to, that's the word I was looking for, strategy. Their whole strategy earlier on the bass reproductive strategies.
Yeah.
So
You
their whole strategy.
had
What?
what was your Paciferous? You
Yeah.
whipped out Paciferous on it. Brain just deleted strategy. It was like,
That's
strategy's
yes.
not a word we need anymore. Don't worry, I've done it myself.
Yeah. That's
It's like you go and your brain goes, well, we
yeah.
don't need the word dog today. We'll get rid of that one, but we'll keep anti-establishment materialism. It's
Mhm.
like, okay, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Go ahead.
No, no, that's exactly right. I'm glad you pointed that out. I'm the king of that kind of thing. So yeah, so baby muskie are not scared of anything, and their strategy is to lay and wait on. They're a true lie in wait predator.
Mhm,
They sit there motionless, and when something swims by, then it's dead if it's fit in their mouth.
mhm.
Small child, duck, whatever.
For real.
So, I mean, not really a child, but they'll eat many things.
Listen, I wouldn't be surprised if it took a swap at one. Like, the
Okay.
experience I've had with muskies is they are
Yeah,
terrifying creatures
yeah,
because they
yeah,
just don't care.
yeah. Well, and they don't, and so the little ones survive from predation by hiding in the weeds.
Mm,
And as you know, we just don't have many weeds in this part of the world
mm,
in our water bodies. But where there are weeds, then the chances of them being able to naturally reproduce and live increase pretty well.
mhm.
Um, but um, but yeah, that's what makes them the way they are. Or that's the way they are. Now, what makes them that way is just that's what they turned into. That was their strategy for survival, was just to be that aggressive and that kind of fish.
Yeah, yeah, and so that's kinda makes sense why, it's almost like they're expanding out into these small creeks and these because
Mm-hmm.
there's no grass where I'm fishing.
Mm-hmm.
It's all hard
Mm-hmm.
bottom. But when you don't have anything to worry about,
Mm-hmm.
except for maybe a eagle or a
Yeah,
you know
birds.
birds, that it's almost like this sense of like you said, a bass is going to experiment and try to do its best to pass on its gene. And it seems like
Mm-hmm.
these muskies are starting to kind of experiment and starting
Yeah,
to figure out this is the best way for us to survive. Like if I'm not in this big body of water where a striper can kill me or a 5-pound largemouth can kill me, but I can go live in this creek and have all the food that I want and get big. It seems like that's kind of what they're doing and where they're going. And that
yeah.
is really interesting and kind of about a muskie's temperament and like the way that they do things is I have noticed in fishing for them, it's like you're going to get bit within the first 2 cranks past
Mm,
something that they could possibly be sitting on. A
mm,
largemouth, you can throw in there 2 or 3 times.
yeah,
They'll be off the bank, they'll be on the bank, they'll be 40 foot
yeah,
of water, they'll be in 2 foot of water.
yeah.
It seems like a muskie is like, oh, there's a tree. Let me throw this thing by this tree. And if that muskie's sitting there, it is like the gates of hell
Mm-hmm.
open up, and here comes a
Yeah.
screaming hell banshee after whatever you were throwing at it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they just demolish things. And
Mm-hmm.
it's very, very interesting. So one thing I have seen is muskies doing very interesting things. And so I just got a few muskie questions, and then I promise we'll get off the muskie thing because I'm just interested by it. First thing I've seen a muskie do is what I call a dolphin. They like dolphin, and I don't know
Mm,
what it is. So I've been fishing in areas. I've seen big ones do it, like huge
mm,
ones do it, and I've seen little ones do it. They'll just come up and like dolphin. It's like their back
yeah,
mouth's not open. They're not aggressively feeding on something. They just kind of dolphin up and swim
yeah,
back. What am I witnessing?
yeah.
When they do that.
Um, I'm so like gar do that because they can breathe air. They have a lung, and I mean that's not what they rely on, but that's why they do that. And muskie is a relatively primitive fish. Here's a rule of thumb for you in that. So the pelvic fins, which are the back two paired fins,
Mm-hmm.
the further they are up the body, the less primitive that fish is.
Mm,
So, like if you picture a sunfish, it's got the pectoral fins, which are like the little arms, and it's got the pelvic fins, which are directly below. If you can picture that in your head.
mm-hmm.
Well, picture a muskie. The pelvic fins are way towards the back, and the pectoral fins are closer to the mouth. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's a sign it's a primitive fish. So anyway,
Yeah.
what I'm getting at is that could be part of that reason. I'm just ignorant to that right now, but I think it could be part of that too, where it pipes air. But
Yeah.
I don't know for sure, but I think that may be what it is.
Yeah. It's very interesting when you're
Yeah,
floating down a creek or sitting in a lake and
yeah,
what I call dolphins, and you're like,
yeah,
oh, that was a giant muskie that just
yeah,
and we call it the dolphin thing, like they
yeah.
dolphin. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
well, yeah, you see Gar doing it, and that's why. And I'm pretty sure Muskie do, but I don't hold me to that because I can't remember for sure. But that's probably what it is. But
Okay.
but speaking of that, and I don't want to get off track here for you, but
Weeds
you know,
do it.
okay, well, Mountain Hill is a good muskie fishery, and I think most people know that. And we've stocked that reservoir for the
Mhm,
last umpteen years, and so we're going to try to uh, tag every fish that goes into that reservoir,
mhm,
every muskie,
mm,
and hopes to determine how much natural reproduction, if any, there is out there. And if there's enough, then we obviously don't need to stock there. So we're going to be tagging those fish and follow them the next several years, and that'll give us some good age and growth too, because we'll know each tag is individualized, so we can tell exactly when and where we've had our hands on that fish and what time. So how much growth per year, we'll be able to determine that for sure. It's not going to be a guessing game. So,
I would love to catch a tagged muskie. I think that would
yeah.
be really, really fun.
Well, so here's the caveat to that. They're called pit tags, and they go into the internal, they're
Oh,
inside the fish, so you won't be able to tell.
mhm. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah. Yeah.
there goes all my hopes and dreams. Dang it, John.
Yeah.
So these muskie. Here's how I'm having to be really careful with this because I don't want to give away too much about all my secret spots. You know what I mean? If
Yeah,
you know, you
yeah,
know. If you don't, you don't.
yeah,
What's the range on these fish?
yeah,
Because we've had this discussion,
yeah,
we've talked about like, where I'm catching these fish 13, 14, 15,
yeah,
17, 18
yeah,
miles away from main lake.
yeah,
Kind of
yeah,
doesn't even make sense.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
it doesn't make sense.
yeah,
We're talking, one thing you talked about is natural reproduction. Muskies I'm catching aren't big ones, but I'm
yeah,
seeing these big ones that would be mamas and daddies. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, how one follow out a spinner bait before it got cold outside. I mean, what I would call a true blue gator. Like I'm talking
yeah.
big head, 50 inches long, huge musky.
Wow,
And
wow.
so it's like it tells me, okay, I feel like these small ones I'm catching aren't just stunted in their growth, and
Mhm.
they're not just stunted in their growth of living in this creek, but they're actually small ones that are
Yeah,
juveniles that are getting bigger.
yeah,
Like, what's the range that we're looking at on a muskie and how
yeah,
far it will travel, or do we kind of like a bass, like where you've got some that are going to stay in an area its whole entire life, but others
yeah,
crack off and swim 20
yeah,
miles?
yeah. So, so all of our reservoirs here are unnatural environments. They're man-made artificial environments. So
Mhm,
most of the fish that we know are adapted to living in a river or stream,
mhm,
and muskie's no different.
mhm,
So just to give you an example, in Middle Tennessee, most of their streams on the plateau, there's no stocking of muskie there. They're
mhm,
doing it on their own.
mhm,
But we do stock our larger rivers here, and for whatever reason, we just can't say, yeah, there's enough natural reproduction, or is there any? That's why we're trying to tag some to find out. But
mhm,
I mean, they're going to swim back and forth, like any fish, just you know, any fish would. But they're also territorial, and I would imagine if you're seeing them, that far up from maybe a main stem water body, then they're probably somewhat residential. But man, I just don't know. You'd have to do some radio tagging. I mean, there's a lot of behavior in fish that, or a lot of different behavior in the same fish, same species of fish.
mhm, mhm,
So, like for walleye example, they're genetically programmed to either spawn in the still water like a lake or moving water like a river. And
mhm,
that same fish can carry both of those behaviors, and it just depends on which one becomes dominant.
mhm.
So muskie could be that way. I just don't know, but it could be like that where okay, this fish wants to live here, but the other fish does. I don't know, but yeah, there's a good chance that those fish are residential fish in that water body.
Interesting. It is so
Hmm.
interesting to me because it's just the more I expand and the more I explore, the more I'm starting to find things that aren't
Yeah,
supposed to be there. I'm not gonna say
yeah,
aren't supposed to be there. I mean, because
right.
it's not that they're, not a natural species in Tennessee.
Hmm.
It's just it's like, what in the how is that
Hmm.
even there? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like the more
yeah,
I explore, the more I'm finding more waterways where these, you know,
yeah,
these big toothy critters live, and I'm like,
yeah,
how did you even get
yeah,
there? You know what I mean? And
yeah,
you think you think there had to be some sort of crazy circumstance
yeah,
for this fish to end up there because of not only man-made obstructions in their ability to get there, but also, just natural obstructions, log jams that are taller than I am that
yeah,
are obstruct. Like, how are you getting over that? How are you getting
yeah,
over? What are you doing to get?
yeah.
It's like I would love to see the world through the eyes of that little
Yeah.
slimy creature for a year
Uh-huh.
just to see what they're doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Oh,
that's
yeah.
interesting. Now, one more
Eh,
question I got, kind of musky bass in general. It kind of leads down this creek thing. Can bass be stunted? Like, if so, you know how like you buy a fish, and certain fish they'll get as big as the tank that you put them in.
mhm,
If a bass doesn't have enough room to, let's say he doesn't have enough room, whether it be depth, length,
mhm,
width, whatever it is,
yeah.
will it get to a certain point where it quits growing like this and starts growing more like that?
Uh, hmm. Well, maybe. I guess an example I can think of is like trout. You know, like a rainbow trout in a wild stream will only grow 6 or 8 inches,
Mm,
and you put that same exact fish in a hatchery raceway, and it'll get 6 or 8 pounds.
Hmm.
So they're only going to, you know, they're going to take care of themselves in a way that they know how to survive. And and I don't know if bass have that same capability, because you don't find them in small streams or small water bodies. Smallmouth and spotted bass are a little bit more adapted to that. Now you'll see little largemouth in small streams, and they could be 10 years old for all I know, but I've never seen a big one in a large stream other than maybe a very deep hole.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
So
I caught a 4-pounder on a buzzbait in 6 inches of water. It's not a joke. And then there was
yeah,
one with him just as big. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like,
yeah,
kind of things, like, it doesn't even make sense.
yeah,
Some of the things that I'm experiencing, you know
yeah.
what I mean? It's just like,
Well, how far it could have been, closer to a habitat that would support a bigger fish like that, because even birds, whatever other predators, like, it's probably not going to stay there in that 6-inch pocket of water forever and
yeah.
get that big. I mean, because there's just simply not enough food to support it. That's why those wild trout,
We'll talk,
same kind of thing.
we'll talk about this more once we get off here, because I don't want
Okay.
I don't want to ruin my spot. I'm going to be
No, no, no.
I know I'm going to be very selfish with everybody listening. Like, I will tell you anything that you want to know outside of my social security number and a couple of my fishing spots. Outside of that, you're welcome to any information.
And social security number would be first over fishing spots, right? Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, well, John, listen, bud, every time you come on, I enjoy it immensely. You are a wealth of knowledge and an awesome human being. And so I appreciate you every time you come on and just bless us with your time, man. You're awesome.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And I appreciate the opportunity to come on. And I'm not just saying that every time I do. And I've not lost sight of the reason I'm in this job. And I thank everybody for fishing and buying their license and being conservationists and working towards the same goal. And it's a good feeling to have it, be able to do that for a career. So I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as always, you guys are sweet. We will see you